Greetings! This talk is being given on the last day of the 12th month on the sacred calendar. So, in America, in 2021, spring ahead, fall back. So we're going to spring ahead. Hooray for Arizona. They keep the same, that's one state that keeps the same time all year. We are very near a very solemn season coming up in a couple of weeks. And we'll be looking forward to that time. I'll have more to say about that in just a moment. But in the meantime, there's some material in the latter section of the Tanakh, of the Old Testament, that I don't want to pass over. Let's go to, first of all, to Daniel, the 24th, to Matthew, the 24th chapter. And as I said, we're a couple of weeks from a very solemn season, a very special season. If you're going to be in Central Florida, let us know. And if you want to be with us for the Lord's Supper, the New Testament Passover, and we have the Leil Shimurim, night to be much observed. It's translated in some ways, or Jews would call it the Seder night. And then we have a service on the first day of unleavened bread. So if you're going to be in this area, let us know. In Matthew 24 and verse 15, Jesus gave an end-time prophecy, very famous, the so-called Olivet prophecy on the Mount of Olives. And he said, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, whosoever reads, let him understand. So he referred to Daniel as a prophet. And in Mark 13 and verse 14, you'll see that's a similar reference. Now, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing where it ought not, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. So you see that Daniel is called the prophet. Now, his material is included in the third portion of the Tanakh, in the writings. He had a secular position. He didn't occupy the office of prophet, but rather he was an administrator in the Chaldean Empire and then later in the Medo-Persian Empire. But that doesn't mean he didn't prophesy. David was king over Israel, and his material is in the book of Psalms, of course. And yet he's also called a prophet in the New Testament. Obviously, many of the Psalms are prophetic. Okay, so we have prophets who didn't necessarily occupy the office of prophet. And we had the secular ruler David, who was also in some ways, he had certain priestly things he did, but on the other hand, there are certain prerogatives that are solely those of the priests and Levites. Then we had Daniel, who was again a secular administrator, but who also was very much associated with prophecy. In fact, the book of Revelation owes so much to the book of Daniel. Daniel would be considered apocalyptic writings in Old Testament times, and then we have the book of Revelation in New Testament times. My talk today is going to be of prophecy and miracles. It seems that when you get to the Old Testament, the end of the Old Testament period, miracles seem to be of a less obvious kind, but there is one final, you might say, a fantastic demonstration. What comes to mind, the 4th of July is coming up. Recently, our President Biden told us that, he's hoping we can get together with family and friends on the 4th of July. Well, in America, of course, that's our Independence Day, the birth of the nation in a certain way. But the 4th of July, we have these fireworks displays, and then they finish with this big flourish, at the end. And that's kind of what happens as the Old Testament period is coming to a close. In a way, we have, not fully, because we still have some history left, but we have major miracles that occur in the book of Daniel. And I want to talk about them today, but I'm going to jump into them in a different way. I'm going to actually, let me see, we have Daniel, of course, there's a miracle in the first chapter. There's 2 miracles in the second chapter. There's a miracle in the third chapter. So now that I'm in the 4th chapter, I'm on the 5th miracle. And I want to talk about that first because that has prophetic significance, and I don't want to I'm afraid if I leave it for later, then I won't have enough time to talk about it fully. So let's go to Daniel 4, and let's understand that at some other time I'll prove this to you. Some of you already know this, but if you look at the Bible and prophecy in the Bible, you find that a biblical time is a year of 360 days. You can understand that if you put various scriptures together from Daniel and Revelation. You'll see that a prophetic time in the Bible is a year of 360 days, and that makes it easier to compute when you have a number like 360. Now, also in the Bible, the principle in Numbers 14:34 and Ezekiel 4:6 is that there are times in prophecy when a day is equal to a year. So something happens over a period of days and is prophetic of a period of years. So a prophetic time could be 360 years, and 7 of them would then be 2,520 years. That's quite an extended period of time, but God is eternal, and God is overlooking the history of the world, and frankly, he wants to make certain prophecies way ahead of time so that his people will understand that he is in charge. He can prophesy thousands of years ahead of time and the prophecies be fulfilled. That, in fact, I hadn't planned to turn there, but I'm going to go to Isaiah 46, and one of the proofs, one of the demonstrations of the reality of God is fulfilled prophecy. He inspires prophecy and he fulfills the prophecy, and it could be thousands of years ahead of time. In Isaiah 46:9, remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. Now the 10th verse, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. So that's one of the indications of the reality of God is fulfilled prophecy. So anyway, with that in mind about the concept of a day for a year, look at what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. He was the first of 4 great empires that would rule over the Middle East, the gold, the silver, the bronze, and then the iron and clay, and so on. You can go back to Daniel 2, and then the animals in Daniel 7. But here we have in Daniel 4, the first of these great world-ruling empires, the Neo-Babylonian or Chaldean Empire, and Nebuchadnezzar has great power, and unfortunately it does go to his head, sadly. Nebuchadnezzar the king, it seemed like he was pretty hard-headed. He had an experience already in the 3rd chapter of Daniel I referred to earlier that should have taught him a lesson, and even what happened in the 2nd chapter. But he was kind of one who had to learn really the hard way, which he did ultimately, though. Nebuchadnezzar the king, and so he talks about a dream that he had, and actually he calls on Daniel to interpret the dream, which would make sense. And in verse 10, these are the visions of my head while on my bed. Nobody else could interpret the dream, so he had to go to Daniel. I was looking, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great, and the tree grew and became strong. Its height reached to the heavens, and it could be seen to the ends of all the earth. Its leaves were lovely, its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it. The birds of the heavens dwelt in its branches, and all flesh was fed from it. So this is the dream that Nebuchadnezzar is describing to Daniel. I saw in the visions of my head while on my bed, and there was a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven. He cried aloud and said thus, chop down the tree and cut off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts get out from under it, and the birds from its branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump and roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze. And of course, those are materials that are also found in the statue in Daniel 2. In it, let's go to verse 15 again. Nevertheless, leave the stump and roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze, in the tender grass of the field. Let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let him graze with the beasts on the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from that of a man. Let him be given the heart of a beast, and let 7 times pass over him. Now this happened literally with Nebuchadnezzar. He had 7 years of madness. Now evidently his staff stayed loyal to him, and that was very important, that they kept him, I guess, out of the limelight, and somehow ruled, worked out a system where the rulership was maintained, even though he was not active. Maybe they could have said, well, he's ill, and or he's gone on far away somewhere to handle some of the issues of the kingdom, of the empire, in faraway lands. He's touring around, whatever they said, But evidently they remained loyal to him. And then when he recovered his sanity, he took over again. And I would imagine Daniel had a lot to do with that too, keeping things stable while the king was in this state of madness. And verse 17 is very important. It's really a very important theme of the entire Bible, that God is in control, that he oversees history, as I've said earlier. And so you can't fully explain history physically. When I was quite young, I wanted to have kind of a formula for explaining events. And so as many young Jewish boys did in those days, I studied Marxism, and I thought I had a key to understanding how events go. And it's definitely true that economics has a lot to do with it, but economics is not all there is to it. Max Weber, as you know, talked about how people can develop beliefs, and then they can act in a certain way, and they're not motivated so much by economics as by a belief system that they have accepted, and that can impact their economic status. They could even maybe not do as well economically, but be personally content because they have these beliefs that they're fulfilling. So anyway, that's a whole other subject. But the point I'm trying to make is, you cannot physically explain everything that's going on in the world geopolitically, because there's a power, there's powers behind, as it were. There's spiritual forces that are working. Verse 17, this decision is by the decree of the watchers, and the sentence by the word of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, gives it to whomever he will, and sets over it the lowest of men. He can take somebody who you wouldn't think he'd amount to much at all, and somehow that person becomes a very powerful person. That can happen because God is in control, and he's guiding and directing events. So that's something Nebuchadnezzar had to learn, that he is a mere human. God is in control. And as I said, you would have thought from Daniel 2 and Daniel 3, he would have got the point, but finally he gets the point now. So anyway, Daniel explains, and Daniel, of course, is a very loyal servant of the king, so he's not happy about what he has to tell him. I'll go to verse 22. So this is symbolic. This tree is symbolic of Nebuchadnezzar and his empire. Verse 22, it is you, O king, who have grown and become strong, for your greatness has grown and reaches to the heavens, and your dominion to the end of the earth. And inasmuch as the king saw a watcher, a holy one, I'm in verse 23 now, coming down from heaven and saying, chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave its stump and roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze in the tender grass of the field. Let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let him graze with the beasts of the field till 7 times pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon my lord the king. They shall drive you from men. Your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make you eat grass like oxen. They shall wet you with the dew of heaven, and 7 times shall pass over you, till you know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. You have to get the point, you have to have a proper perspective about who you are, who God is. So, verse 26, and inasmuch as they gave the command to leave the stump and roots of the tree, your kingdom shall be assured to you after you come to know that heaven rules. So he told him to try to get right with God. Perhaps, this decree could be overcome, by his repentance. Therefore, O king, let my advice be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by being righteous, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor. Perhaps there may be a lengthening of your prosperity. Well, evidently the king continued to be rather dictatorial in his approach, arrogant in his approach, and you can read about what happened. And so eventually, indeed, he does have this 7 years of seeming insanity. Really, that's a miracle in itself, but it's kind of a part of the whole package of Daniel 4. The interpretation of the dream and then its fulfillment is a miracle you can see in Daniel 4. This is not a natural event, what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. It's beyond natural, it's supernatural. And I think in a way, too, it's almost supernatural, the fact that the kingdom held together for those 7 years so he could recover. And he finally did. And in verse 36, at the same time my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom, my honor and splendor returned to me. My counselors and nobles resorted to me. I was restored to my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added to me. Verse 37, now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven. All of whose works are truth, and his ways justice, and those who walk in pride he is able to put down, as Nebuchadnezzar learned. So 7 times passed over him, and in a way this was prophetic. 7 times 360 is 2,520. So with the day for a year principle, the final the final resurrection of Babylon that you read about in the book of Revelation was not going to happen for 2,520 years. Now, if we read the book of Revelation and combine it with Daniel, we see that final fourth empire was going to have resurrections. There was a Roman Empire, but would have various resurrections. And then a final resurrection would be called Babylon. It would be very similar to that first empire, the empire of Nebuchadnezzar. And it's the final Babylon. And it falls, Jeremiah prophesies about it in type, in a way, talking about Nebuchadnezzar, talking about the Chaldean Empire, but then it projects into the far future. And in Revelation, we see the fall of that final Babylon. But it doesn't really rise up for 7 times. Now, the 7 times, of course, begin with its fall, and it fell in the autumn of 539 BC, and that's what's pictured in Daniel 5. In Daniel 5, we see the handwriting on the wall. So another miracle occurs in that Daniel interprets this particular message. In the 5th chapter of Daniel, we have the night, which was the fall of the Babylonian Empire, actually the Chaldean, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the Chaldean Empire, where the Medes and Persians come in, where Cyrus takes over, and he puts over the Babylon somebody called Darius the Mede, who now a scholarly article claims that Cyaxares II. But anyway, in verse 25 of Daniel 5, we have the, in American language, mene tekel upharsin. And what we have here is that Daniel understands what's going on, and counted, and then he has tekel. It's like the Hebrew word shekel. This is Aramaic here, but it's like the Hebrew word shekel, which is a weight. It's like the British have the currency called the pound. So a shekel was the currency of ancient Israel. So we have mene. We have counted. Then we have a weight, and then we have and they divide, upharsin, and they divide. Now it means and the in is a plural. So the actual word is PHRS. That's the 3-letter root. The Semitic languages have these 3-letter roots, and so the root is PRS. Upharsin is the form, and so when it's interpreted, you just see Perez, division. And so we have the first one is very, very important. It's repeated, counted. This is the interpretation of each word. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. And this is a play on words, because Farsin means they're dividing, but the Persians are called the Parsim. That's also the Persian language today. The language of Iran is called Farsi, and so the Parsis are Persians. There's a group of people in India, evidently migrated there from Iran, that are Zoroastrian. They have a form of Zoroastrianism. I think they're still in India. They're called Parsis, evidently because of where they came from, where the origin of their religion. So it's a play on words. Now there's an additional play on words here, and that is the fact that these are coinages. The Babylonian Empire was very much an empire based on avarice, on gathering wealth. And so you have coins, mina, shekel, and then a peres would be a half a mina. So if you look at it this way, mina, shekel, upharsin, you have, I want to go to Ezekiel 45, and you'll see there that there is a mina which is 60 shekels. Let's see, okay. Should be the 18th verse. Am I in Ezekiel 45? I'm looking for the statement about the value of a shekel, but in the 45th chapter of Ezekiel, I'm not getting the right verse here, so maybe my beloved wife can find the reference, but it shows that there is a mina which is 60 shekels. So if you go back to many shekel upharsin, if a mina is 60 shekels, so we have maybe if we have mina meaning 60 shekels, then we have shekel, which is 1 shekel, and then we have upharsin, and you could look at that as, and dividing, look at that as maybe 2 half shekels, because you divide a shekel. So you could have a shekel and then you divide a shekel, and so you have another shekel, 2 halves of a shekel, and then you have 1 shekel. So you have a mina, which is 60 shekels, 1 shekel, and then a division, 2 halves of a shekel. Altogether, that makes 62. Now, the reason why that's significant is because when the kingdom falls, you go to verse 31, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom being about 62 years old. Okay, so anyway, there is a reference in Ezekiel. I thought it was
11.
Ezekiel 45:11. Very good. So let's, prove all things, hold fast that which is good.
11, 12, and 13.
Pardon me? Here it is. It talks about the shekel in verse 12, but where's the mina? Where are you telling me? Verse 11?
It says 12, at the end of it says minus. At the end of that verse.
Okay. It says, and shekel shall be 20 gerahs, 20 shekels, 25 shekels, and 15 shekels shall be your mina. So that altogether makes 60. Okay, so this is the 12th verse of Ezekiel 45. You have 20 shekels and 25 shekels, that's 45, and 15 shekels, that's 60, shall be your mina. Okay, so 60 shekels in a mina. Okay, so you can thank Linda for that reference. Ezekiel 45 and verse 12. Okay, now I want to go beyond that though, because in Ugarit, north of the land of Israel, excuse me, north of the land of Israel, in Ugarit, there was a shekel that was, there was a mina that was 50 shekels rather than 60. And that's quite interesting, because if you have 50 shekels and 50 shekels, then that makes 100 shekels. And then you have 1 shekel. That's 101 shekels. Then you have Perez, which is a half a mina. All right, so you have a mina, which is 50 shekels, a mina, which is 50 shekels, that's 100 shekels. Then you have a shekel, that's 101 shekels. Then you have a Perez, which is half a mina, which is 25 shekels. And so that equals 126 shekels. Are you with me? Okay, this is like financial, is like an economics class. Let's go to Exodus 30 and verse 13. Exodus 30 and verse 13. This is what everyone among you who are numbered shall give. Half a shekel according to the shekel of the sanctuary. A shekel is 20 gerahs. The half shekel should be an offering to the Eternal. So here we have a shekel is 20 gerahs. Are you with me? Now let's go to Numbers 3 and verse 47. Numbers 3 and verse 47. Okay, so now we see, you shall take 5 shekels for each one individually. You shall take them in the currency of the shekel of the sanctuary, the shekel of 20 gerahs. So you agree with me now that a shekel is 20 gerahs. So now we have 126 shekels times 20. That's 2,520. So isn't that interesting? When the kingdom falls, we have this evaluation that in effect there's going to be a restraint on that kingdom. Remember, there was a stump, and the stump was restrained, and then the stump, returned. So that was Nebuchadnezzar after 7 years. But now we have the empire of Nebuchadnezzar in type. That final Babylon is restrained for 2,520 years. So let's go from 539 to 2,520 years. Remember, there's no year 0. You go from 1 BC to 1 AD on the calendar. That's kind of a flaw there. So you come to 1982, and Babylon fell in the fall of 539 BC. In the autumn of 1982, events occurred that led to the fall of the communist empire of the Eastern Europe and the Eastern European Communist Empire and the Soviet Union itself. And this evidently was necessary historically in order for there to be, at some point, an empire that would arise, which would be a resurrection of the ancient Roman Empire. Europe had to, in effect, break free of Soviet domination for that to occur. And it really began to happen in the autumn of 1982. That's when there was a sudden, dramatic change politically, where we had a government in Germany that had it was only West Germany then, that was kind of soft on communism, and it was replaced by the Christian Democratic Party suddenly, which was more hostile to communism. And at that time we had Margaret Thatcher in the UK, we had Ronald Reagan in the United States, we had John Paul II, a Polish Pope, and now we had Helmut Kohl. So the Pope and Reagan narrowly escaped assassination, and maybe even Margaret Thatcher. But in any case, these people helped lead a new world situation that led to the fall of the communist empire, and evidently that was necessary for ultimately this new power or this resurrected Roman Empire to rise whenever it is going to. And I don't know when that's going to happen, but I'm just saying at least the preparation was there 7 times afterwards for it to happen. And obviously it takes time for everything to coalesce, so we really don't know when that's going to happen, but at least we saw that the way had been prepared for it to happen. So God, I believe God only knows when things will come to a head finally. But I think I thought this would be of interest for you to see that it's implied, it's there even in Daniel 4 and 5, so that in 1982, in the autumn of 1982, an evangelist whom I greatly respect, who was in a way my mentor, kind of a father figure to me. He's not alive anymore, but he gave a Bible study, and he said, we see a fulfillment now of prophecy. We see 7 times have passed, and the restraint has been removed. We now see that things are going to things are going to happen in world events that are going to lead the way or prepare the way for that final resurrection of the Roman Empire. He gave a Bible study. Some of you perhaps remember it. All right, now in the time I have remaining, I took a lot of time with that, but I hope and pray that was helpful to you. You see, there's so much you can dig out of the Bible if you and I don't believe I did anything that would be considered radical or untoward. I believe that what I gave you can be documented historically and can be demonstrated. And as I said, in future studies, I can show you more about the prophetic time and how it works. But I want to mention that in Daniel 1, he did not want to eat the fancy food of an elite. He wanted to identify with his people in captivity, and a miracle occurred, and he and his friends were in better shape than those who were being given the fancy food. In the 2nd chapter, he miraculously interprets a dream, and first he reveals the dream, and then he interprets it. So you have 2 miracles there. In Daniel 3, you have the miracle of the fiery furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. You have the fiery furnace miracle. So that's now a 4th miracle. And Daniel 4, you have the miracle of Daniel interpreting the dream and the fulfillment of it. And then in the 5th chapter, you have the handwriting on the wall and the fulfillment of it that very night, if you keep reading. And so now we have yet a 7th miracle to complete the picture in Daniel 6. Daniel continues to pray, even though it could cost him his life. And I want you to tie in Daniel 6:10 with Matthew 6:10. Now, this is Daniel 6:10. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. And you know what happened. He was sent into a den of lions, and reluctantly Darius did that. He really didn't want to, but he had made the same mistake Nebuchadnezzar had made a lot earlier. And he had too much of an ego. He allowed himself to be flattered by sycophants who wanted really to have more power and to do Daniel in. They were jealous of Daniel and his influence. Well, anyway, so he was lured. He was convinced against his better judgment. And finally he realized, oh, this is terrible. But God intervened, and notice in verse 26, after Daniel comes out of the lions, then Darius reacts as Nebuchadnezzar did earlier, as I read. And this is verse 26. This is now Darius the Mede, perhaps Cyaxares the second, ruling under Cyrus. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. Okay, so this is the gospel. The kingdom of God. God is ultimately going to establish his kingdom on earth. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders, as we see in the book of Daniel, miracles. In heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. And so we see that Daniel continued. He had a long life. He came as a teenager in captivity. He lived into at least his late 80s. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So all through that period of the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the Chaldean Empire, and then into the early years of the Medo-Persian Empire, Daniel was around and could not be stopped. One way or the other, God protected him. And he continued to be in a very influential position. And probably he played a role in preserving the canon of the Old Testament, because he had such power in Babylon. He would have been able to gather together books, scrolls for the royal archives. He very likely played a role in canonization of the Old Testament. So we see that as we come to the conclusion of the Old Testament, the book of Daniel in the Tanakh is late in the Tanakh. We have Ezra and Nehemiah as the 21st book, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles as the 22nd book. I believe that you should look in terms of 22. Now, nowadays, modern Judaism looks at it in terms of 24. But in any case, Daniel is pretty close to the end. You have the book of Daniel, then you have Ezra, Nehemiah, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles. So in the Tanakh, Daniel comes late, and it's a kind of crescendo where God shows, as I conclude the canon, I do these great miracles. And then in the end time, of course, you read the book of Revelation, you see great miracles will be occurring then. And I want to go to the book of Revelation now, to the 15th chapter. So we're just a couple of weeks away from the Lord's Supper, the New Testament Passover, and the night to be much observed, and the festival of unleavened bread. So as we prepare to de-leaven physically, and as we were, prepare to de-leaven spiritually, because we could always do more, to be better Christians. We could always be de-leavening in some area or other. There's some corner of our lives, where there's a little, there's some crumbs that need to be swept away, as we understand. But as we prepare for that, we can be motivated because we understand that indeed God is in control. He is omnipotent. He is omnibeneficent, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, and he is eternal. And we need to be on his side. And if we are, then we are assured of victory ultimately, and so we can enter the spring festival season confidently. And I want to go to Revelation 15, and as we think about the spring festival season, of course, Moses will come to mind. In verse 3, he is a type of Jesus Christ. In Revelation 15:3, talking about the saints, they sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, because Moses was a type of Jesus Christ, and the song of the Lamb. And Jesus Christ is the Lion of Judah, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. But we remember in a couple of weeks that he is the Lamb. He is the Passover Lamb. He is our sacrifice. He's our Savior. He's our King. He's also our Savior. They sing the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb, saying, "Great and marvelous are your works, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are your ways, O King of the saints." This is similar to what, of course, Nebuchadnezzar acknowledged and what Darius the Mede acknowledged. Verse 4, "Who shall not fear you, O Lord, and glorify your name? For you alone are holy. For all the nations shall come and worship before you, for your judgments have been manifested." So I hope that we have benefited from this brief discussion of prophecy and miracles. All the best to you and yours.